Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our first in a series of webinars on post-extractivism. So today we have a couple of wonderful guest speakers who will be joining us to talk about what is extractivism and its impacts. But before I pass over to Anissa from Blockade IMARC, I would like to acknowledge country. So I'm calling in from Whadjuk Noongar country in the southwest of Western Australia. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, not just on Whadjuk Noongar country, but on all of the countries that we're calling in from today. I would like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm very lucky to live across the road from a bush block, and it's been beautiful to see as the seasons change, all the different flowers come out. So we're currently in Camberang, which is one of the 6 Noongar seasons. And yeah, that's very important to consider this, the fact that sovereignty was never ceded, especially when we talk about extractivism and how that impacts First Nations peoples across the lands of Australia. So I will just give a quick introduction to the New Economy Network of Australia. So I'm Rhiannon, I'm in the coordinating hub of NENA, and NENA is a network of individuals and civil society organisations that are working to transform Australia's economic system in order to centre human wellbeing and economic and social and ecological justice. So yeah, we have wonderful organisations and co-ops and individuals, academics all across Australia working to transform the system and inputting into NENA through different hubs. So whether that's geographic hubs across Australia, from Perth to far north Queensland in South Australia, also sectoral hubs. So today we have the Post-Extractivism hub presenting this webinar, and we have lots of different hubs as well that might be of interest to you. I will put the website into the chat afterwards so you can check it out. We actually have our 2021 conference coming up next week, which is very exciting. There's many speakers to hear from. So if you'd like to check that out, I'll also put that in the chat shortly. So now I'll pass over to Anissa from Blockade IMARC to take us away. Thank you so much.
Thanks heaps, Rhiannon, and thanks everyone for joining us. So I'm Anissa. I'm part of the Blockade IMARC group. So people might have heard of IMARC. It's the International Mining and Resources Conference, which happens in Melbourne on Kulin Country every year. It's coming up at the end of January. And so, yeah, we're a network of groups that, we are against extractivism, which is what you'll learn about today. And so we do that as a protest physically when all these mining and resources come together, which is, I'm in Melbourne on Wurundjeri Willem country, and I'm not comfortable to have all of these mining and resources companies in my backyard. So that's what we do, and we're really interested in the ideas of extractivism. So I'm really excited that you're all here and to be part of this conversation. Now, unfortunately, we were really looking forward to having Cody from the Wangan and Jagalingou call in, but being in central Queensland and far away from many towns, the Wi-Fi that they had set up has stopped working. And so unfortunately it was I think it was 2 hours drive to get to the nearest reception point. I don't know how many of you have been out in central Queensland. I think I saw someone in the chat had been up there, but it is huge distances. So yeah, unfortunately Cody can't join us tonight. Hopefully we'll be able to have him on in future webinars, but we do have some videos that show, and we'll be able to talk a bit to that a bit later on. And if anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to get them to him and those folks on the front line. So yeah, but first I'll pass over to Nat Lowry, who's going to start talking about what is extractivism. So take it away, Nat.
Thanks, Anissa. I'm Nat Lowry. I'm currently living and working on the unceded lands of the Wiradjuri Boy Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. And I also pay my respect to elders past and present, and that wherever we live and walk in so-called Australia, we live and walk on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander lands, and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Sovereignty has never been ceded. I have spent the last 2 or so decades working around this thing called extractivism, specifically around large-scale mining, and specifically working with frontline communities, Indigenous peoples in Australia, Papua New Guinea, Chile, Canada, all over the place, particularly looking at Australia's role, our companies, our corporations, and our investments, our aid and trade. So tonight, I'm going to share my screen. The question is, what is extractivism? What does this word actually mean? And I think looking at some of the chats there, some of you are probably pretty familiar, but what I will be presenting is a bit of a 101 overview of what is extractivism. So this is a large concept, and I'd like to sort of take it back to its origins, and the origins of extractivism actually comes from Latin America, and this word extractivismo, this discourse which is sort of intertwined the thinking of academics and grassroots activists, including Indigenous communities and Latin America. And here you see here is in Ecuador, where we have Indigenous communities protesting. And this extractivismo centres the lands and communities directly affected by extractive projects. More often than not, they're in rural spaces, but as we see the growth of urbanisation globally, that's even shifted in Latin America. And so in Ecuador, for example, on this image on the right, these Indigenous communities, I think this is around 2015, they joined with a huge alliance of other radical groups and against sort of extractivism as a threat to their livelihoods, lands and waters for their collective rights to lands and culture. Oops. And this image that that's just come up on the left there, I think it's kind of important to note because this is in 2019. And if anyone doesn't know who Gina Reinhardt is, she's the richest woman in Australia with a net worth of 31 billion, which has been made from extractivism, particularly mining. And in this image in 2019, Ecuadorian President Moreno ordered 2,000 troops into her Henry mine, this is the Imba 2 concession, to clear out 10,000 so-called illegal miners, mainly communities. So these 2 images are very interesting that go together as we sort of begin this conversation about what extractivism is. So this concept has travelled far and wide, and it's taken on new meanings and opened up new vistas of critique as well as resistance. And I think we have to remember in this conversation we're having in this space about extractivism, we're also talking about the resistance to it. So broadly speaking, the concept of extractivism, most people would know, it has 2 elements. One is the process of extraction, and that is usually seen as the raw materials such as metals and minerals. And that top left image is actually the Kalgoorlie super pit on Wongutha country in Western Australia. Logging of forests, that's down in the southern part of Tasmania. Agriculture, as we see there, that's Cubby Station up in Queensland. Fracking, gas fracking, that's a gas fracking area in Queensland. Hydroelectricity and hydro dams, that's the Snowy Hydro Dam, which was a very famous pioneering industrial endeavour of the sort of colonial Australia. And on the right here, you've got fish farms, the salmon fish farms in Tasmania. So these are the sort of process of extraction that we think of, I guess, when we think of extractivism. But the concept has also kind of migrated, and I think it's important to touch on some other sort of logics, extractive logics, outside of just extracting of natural resources. So one of these is, oops, my slide doesn't want to go forward for a reason. There we go. They call urban extractivism, or the sort of transnational commodity flows. And an example of this is like the fashion industry and the sweatshops. So for example, Nike with its athletic cult branding and marketing is only really made possible because the making of their products are out of view halfway across the world. This extracted labor, this modern day slavery, which is very much what it is is a human rights issue that is erased by this incredible marketing machine of Nike, like the just do it, just consume. Another form of extractivism or extractive logic is data extractivism, operations of digital platforms. So hand in hand with the development of information technologies, so social media, big data tools, machine learning, algorithms. The Economist is now saying that data has become the new oil of contemporary capitalism. So data has effectively become a kind of raw material that can be extracted, commercialized, refined, and processed, and then transformed into other commodities with added value. And you only have to look at the likes of Amazon, Google, Facebook, and their billion-dollar profits to see information as a key commodity of contemporary capitalism. So this is another extractive logic that's out there. Another extractive logic is the financial extractivism, through stock markets. And a really classic example of this, we who live in the major cities of Australia would have seen this very much over the last 10 or 20 years or more, and that's gentrification. So, for example, a social housing, a high-rise building for low-income people is bought by a rich investor or financier. He doesn't actually care about the building or the community that's in that building. They care about the assets of that building, the field of materiality, which goes back into this financial circuit. The building kind of no longer is seen as a building. It becomes a kind of a game of buy and sell. And that's at the expense of those low-income people who maybe didn't have the fanciest building, but it functioned and they had community. And another one of the extractive logics that we'll probably talk to in our future webinars is green extractivism. So this is around the global transition to renewables. So, a central demand of climate movements is to move to 100% renewable energy. And I think most of us on this call would go, yes, we want the fossil fuel industry to end. We need renewables. But this call is resulting in a new wave of extractivism that's reproducing the similar dynamics and practices that's really caused the climate crisis in the first place. And there's a potential, and there already is, widespread destruction and human rights abuses. And this is by the so-called transition minerals. These are things like cobalt, lithium, nickel, and copper, among many others. So it's the corporate and profit-driven renewable energy, sorry, my dog, and climate mitigation projects carried out at the expense and rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So in the case of tonight's webinar, we'll be mainly focusing back on the extraction of raw materials and bringing it back into the context of Australia, particularly the impacts on First Nations peoples, on their culture, their lands and water, and their ongoing resistance to extractivism. So in thinking about extractivism, there's also these assumptions of extractivism, of the extractivist model. It's like anything can be extracted: minerals, resources, labor, data and cultures, women's bodies. It's a take logic, not one of giving. And the extractivist model is built on these key assumptions that have proved to be a little relationship to reality, like domination of nature. So the scientific and technological domination of nature, which is considered as an unlimited pool of natural resources to be exploited and commodified. There's also, the rational economic man, the profit maximizing individual and isolated human whose well-being depends on the accumulation of material goods. There's also this conception of the economy as a closed cycle, which is driven by this logic of profit and incorporating only monetized relations and activities carried out on the market. And then the other one, which we hear all the time by our government, is the goal of unlimited growth. It's like the pillar of social and economic organisation in Australia, in the West, and in the sort of dominating political and economies of the world we're currently in. And so all forms of extractivism are entirely tied up with the exploitation of people. And this brings us to that second element of the concept of extractivism, which refers to the conditions under which the extraction process takes place, and actually whose interests it serves. So when thinking about an economic framework of extractivism, we need to confront and define the multiple social, cultural, economic, and environmental implications it brings. And many of these costs of extractivism is moved across to society as a whole to bear and are not borne by the producer. What are some of the costs and who's benefiting and who's not? Well, one thing we have to put at the fore is this extractive logic is built on violence. And this includes, abuses to human rights, health, land, food, water, workers' rights, housing, freedom of assembly, access to information, cultural life, collective rights, displacement of people from their homes and lands, violation of Indigenous people's rights, treaties' rights, sovereignty, and this includes the desecration of sacred sites. And I think most of you on this call, because it became such an international issue, would have heard of the destruction of the Juukan Gorge that belongs to the Putu, Kuntu, Kuruma and Punakura peoples in Western Australia and was destroyed by Rio Tinto. And even though there's been a report, and even though Rio Tinto got rid of some of its executives, they took big packages with them, mind you, big money packages. And even though they say never again, this will never happen again, the thing is it continues to happen. Extractivism continues to do this. An example of this is 463 applications to destroy or disturb sites of significance to local Aboriginal people in Western Australia by mining companies since mid-2010. Not a single one has been declined. And this is still happening. So even though Juukan Gorge is very important and it's great, it got so much publicity, the reality is there's a whole lot of cultural heritage sites right now across Australia that are about to be destroyed. There's also a failure to implement any sort of meaningful consent processes like free, prior and informed consent with affected communities. And of course, we have air and water contamination, deforestation, biodiversity loss. So in this case, this is the Panguna mine in Bougainville, which has left a huge environmental desecration there, but also created conflict in a civil war where 20,000 people died, once again at the hands of Rio Tinto. And of course, we have air pollution and climate change, we know, with fossil fuel industry. Also, the redistribution of wealth in favour of developed countries, where transnational corporations and the shareholders and country elites, well, they're actually the winners. And that's at the expense of common good and the local communities whose lands are being destroyed, whose lives are being destroyed. And there's criminalisation of human rights and environmental defenders, and that's been increasing over the last 10 years. And if you get a chance, go and look at Global Witness. They have really good reports around the impacts on human rights defenders around the world. Also repression of protests and using the legal system that ends up protecting corporations over local communities. This is another thing that's really big part of this extractivism that we see. And also use of military and security forces, as I showed you in that image in the beginning of Gina Reinhardt's mine in Ecuador. And also, last but not least, gender-based violence and discrimination against women. So all these sort of impacts that I've spoken to, the communities that I've worked with, frontline communities I've worked with over the last 20 years, have either had to deal with many or all of those impacts. And they're really huge and they're really ongoing and they last for generations, as we see here in Australia. So what is extractivism in Australia then? What is Australia's role? What is the economic framework of extractivism here? So generally when people think of the extractivism development model, it's in place, it's been in place since sort of colonial times. And it's most often thought of in a framework of a dominant and highly unequal model of development, which is geared for the exploitation and marketing of natural resources in the global south for export to the rich economies of the global north. But Australia it's unique again. And here's a good quote actually from Eduardo Galeano, very much about that extraction from the colonies to go back to the colonizers. But in Australia, where we have colonization, we are, I mean, in terms of mining especially, but in terms of agriculture, we're an extractivist country. There's no doubt about it. And to kind of understand Australia in terms of extractivism, we need to unpack this idea of settler colonialism, which some people may or may not have heard of. So settler colonialism, is primarily about land. So the clue's in the name, the settler stays and establishes sovereignty over stolen lands in the case of Australia, or stolen lands of First Nations peoples. And this is like a logic of elimination. It centres access to land as the primary motivation for elimination of the First Nations people here. And as you can see, these Aboriginal men who are being incarcerated for probably no reason. Maybe they were defending their lands, And so the settler state aimed to displace First Nations presence through land theft and genocide, so they could establish their own direct connection with the land. So, I'm a colonial settler, and my privilege and benefits have been from this history, even though I may not have come here and done these atrocities myself. And to broaden this further, you have this sort of extractive settler capitalist economies, which brings us sort of into the current day. And I think this says it so much. It's the Mineral Council of Australia. Miners only recently, mining exports are the foundation of Australia's economic prosperity. So we still have this centred so much in our economic prosperity, is that we need to dig up the lands of First Nations people and then export it. And then, we'll be wealthy, but it's at the cost of our environment. It's the cost of First Nations people. It's the cost of other local communities who are now seeing the impacts of this, farmers included. And so, it's just been built on this ongoing process of Indigenous displacement and dispossession and erasure. And it still stands as one of Australia's most enduring national features. Not a great one, but it really is a feature of the history of this country, and in some ways we are still very much about that. And we also export this extractive ideology overseas. So while we mine here, we also have a massive amount of corporations mining or opening up other large-scale developments in other parts of the world on other people's lands, on Indigenous lands, where they sometimes have less right to recourse and in these cases. But there's always resistance. So coming to the end, and I think this will be kind of a segue, the resistance here has been important around extractivism. It's a very old image, land rights movement. This was more of a relatively new one. I think this is Seed Mob outside Parliament maybe a few years ago, land rights, not mining rights. So it's still very much embedded in the discourse of land rights in terms of First Nations movements here. So in some ways, just to sort of finish up, there needs to be a recalibration of this Australian settler state that actually prioritises First Nations interests over our so-called national interests. But, it's really sad to say nothing in living memory suggests that any government is up to embracing such a challenge. I think there's individuals and politicians who are out there, but in terms of governments and power, the revolving door of corporates, extractives, and our politicians is very, very intensive. So I believe it's actually up to us. It's us, the people. We need to stand up. We need to stand with First Nations people who fought against extractivism since the first days of colonisation. And extractivism is large, and to many of us, we can't see a way out of this extractive mindset or this sort of economy that we're in. However, alternatives to extractivism are just as expansive. And we will be, I think our next webinar will be looking at this. We'll be looking at post-extractivism. So I want to leave on a note of thinking about an expansive visionary world beyond extractivism, a world of post-extractive economies and societies that protect culture and biological diversity, where we can create national and local systems of care, we can cancel external debt in global south, have a universal basic income, where food sovereignty is prioritised, and we restore and strengthen models and modes of information and communication that are rooted in society and community, and so much more. So I would end it there, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that, Nat. That was really good. And I have some questions. I bet a lot of people have some questions. That was a lot of information there. So yeah, take some notes or feel free to write some questions in the chat. We'll have some more time later to unpack all of that wonderful information and just this idea of what is an extractivist mindset, what is extractivist logic. But now, in place of having the wonderful Cody talk to us, I'm going to share a couple of videos that'll give the context of the fight that him and others are doing out in central Queensland. I'm sure everyone here must have heard of Adani. It's hard to find somebody who hasn't heard of Adani these days, or as they tried to call themselves, Bravas. So yeah, Cody and the Wangan and Jagalingou people have been fighting against Adani on their country in the Galilee Basin for a very long time now, and this is one of the most recent iterations of what's going on.
Waramuli, Ngaju Nari Kuri, Ngaya Wadawidi, Ngaju Yambanani Wangu e Yalengu. Welcome, my name is Kuri. I'm a cultural custodian of the Wangan and Jagalingou homelands, and I've been protecting my homelands against Adani for the last 9 years. We have maintained our culture, we assert our rights at Adani's mine site, and we will continue to assert our rights. The government can't stop us, the Queensland Police can't stop us, and certainly Adani can't stop us. I'm constantly on country to watch for the destruction that Adani is doing to my sacred homelands. We as Wangan and Jagalingou people need your support. We need your help in protecting Dungmabula. Dungmabula means place of many waters. This is an ancient spring system that's been running for thousands of years. It is a sacred place to us that is the final resting place of the Munagara, the rainbow serpent. This story travels all around Australia through different tribes. I need to be able to keep going and keep pressuring Adani until he finally packs up and leaves. Please, donate. Help keep this fight going. We've come to a crucial point in our fight. Adani is continuing to push forward whilst destroying our country. The main reason for us here is to perform ceremony. The ceremony is called Waranango, which means the talking. It's named after the stone circle that we have up here, which is an ongoing ceremony. It's an open-ended ceremony. We don't know how long this takes. It's over when it's over.
Every year I come out here, and even though everything is changing as well, like I still have so much hope, because every year that I come out I get more and more connected to the land and to the springs, and this is my home. This has been our home for generations.
Ever since I was a little kid, you know, we've been fighting this coal mine for so long, and you know, when is he going to wake up and realise that, you know, this is hurting our culture, you know? You know, I just want to, you know, spread this culture and spread it, you know, for my younger siblings and, you know, my generation and the next generation and so forth, you know? You know, all they're going to know is when they wake up, and then they're going to be like, oh, where's my country? What's my language? What's my skin? What's my totem? And that hurts when you ask another black fellow that and they don't know what their totem is, because they took it from them. You chain drag their land and you do this. So you tell me, you look at the bigger picture.
We need to move forward. We need to get away from this dirty coal. It's not helping anyone, and it's not helping the environment, it's not helping the animals, the water system. Once the water system goes, it's done. We need to protect what's ours, and every Australian should understand that. If you call Australia home, you need to be protecting this. You need to be fighting for this.
We've been warning you about the damage to the Dungmabula Springs and to the landscape and to all our animals, but you haven't seemed to get the picture. You don't understand that you're killing this environment. We've tried to tell you in English, but we have to speak it in language.
Every bit of coal that is coming out of that mine is having a tremendous effect on what's happening all around the world. This is not just what's going to happen here, it affects everywhere and everyone.
From now on, we're talking in language. Ngaya bindana buri. Ngaya nagana mungo.
So let's say you have to read an
We've been approached by the Mayor of the Isaac Regional Council. They reached out to us as the traditional owners or the custodians of the Wangan Jagalingu claim to essentially reconcile with us some of the differences going back to the colonisation. And this form of reconciliation and goodwill goes a long way to heal the past, the injustices that occurred upon our people. In this area, this region, there were certain violent conflicts between pastoralists and early settlers and our ancestors. And so this form of reconciliation, or this particular way that the Isaac Regional Council is reaching out to us, is a form that we recognise as a way of going forward with the community. In saying all of those things, we've never been approached by the state government. The Palaszczuk government has done nothing to offer our people any form of reconciliation or progress. They've never spoken to us about any form of treaty or any process to develop a working relationship with the state government. All they've done is supported a massive mega mine to rip the heart out of our country and allow Adani to steal our water and destroy our sacred springs, and to affect the aquifers and destroy our country beyond recognition. What images that we're looking at right now over the mine site, this is the destructive power that this mine is already having upon the land, and is affecting our totems, our animals, the nature, the environment, and it's already having effect on the waterways. We are calling a stop work on the Adani Bravas mine until we get an independent investigation, analysis and surveys on the water, the Dungabula Springs and the aquifers. Our experts, Matthew Currell from RMIT, has given a report to the government highlighting and outlining all of the things that this mining company is doing to affect the groundwater. It's sad for me, and I'm sad that the Native Title Party work with these environmental terrorists. They're a nuisance to us while we're here. They're a nuisance to farmers. They're a nuisance to the local people. They're a nuisance because they're creating pollution. And they're an environmental nuisance. So we want them out of here. What they're doing is not acceptable. We don't accept it. And any free-thinking human being would not accept them taking whatever water they want when they don't even have a water permit. We see these trucks traveling up and down this road here every day and using thousands of litres of water. We are concerned that no one is telling us where they're getting it from, because Adani seems to have this self-reporting scheme that the government is saying they don't have to tell us, and the Queensland government are not obliged to ask them, and the same as the federal government. Adani has a self-reporting scheme, and the federal government just lets them do whatever they want.
Yep. So hopefully you enjoyed those videos. We can share all the links with you afterwards, so that you can share them with other people you know. Yeah, it's a really important fight that, as was said in the videos, this is in the country that we live. So if we can do what we can to support, yeah, I think somebody here has already been up there. Anybody who wants to travel to central Queensland, especially before it gets too hot, because I've been up there in summer and it's very, very hot. Yeah, they're planning to stay there for you know, until Adani leaves. The Queensland Police have already said that they're not going to move them on, and so they'll be there and they need our support. So we'll be sending through links through how people can get up there, and then how people can send money if you're not able to make it up there, or share the word. There is a webinar this Thursday specifically recruiting, so we'll be sharing all of those details. But it is quite an inspirational story. But now what we wanted to do is that we wanted to put you into breakout rooms so you could have a bit of a discussion for 10 minutes and have a think about what you've heard. I personally find it really hard to absorb information for a long time without being able to chat. So yeah, we'll put you into some breakout rooms. You can talk about what you understood, what you didn't understand, come up with some questions. Probably the people in the breakout rooms can answer them, or if not, can bring them back to Nat and I, and also to take to Cody. So if you don't want to be in a breakout room, feel free to just not join. That's completely fine. But yeah, we'll be chucking you in now. Yeah, feel free to stay in the main room, but it'll be about 10 minutes and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
So you want me to join a breakout room?
If you want to.
Okay, you've just put me in one, so.
Okay, oh, I just automatically put everybody in them.
Okay.
I'm not sure if because you're co-host, so you should be able to choose where you go. Oh, Karen's alone in room 6.
Okay, I'll go to room 6. That's what you put me in.
Oh, cool. Awesome. And yeah, I imagine this might be some of you cooking or doing things while on the call. So yeah, feel free to not join, and in about 10 minutes, we'll do the question and answer kind of thing. I'll put on a song. We made a bit of a playlist, a Beyond Mining playlist. So I'll play a couple of songs for those of you that are still hanging around. And we'll come back at 7:50. So yeah, I've just been listening to some music here in the main room as some people are making dinner or doing stuff. I think there's still a few people in the breakout room, so they'll be kicked back in 8 seconds. Awesome. Hopefully you had some good chats, brought up some questions. Got to know some people. So now it's the question time. I'm not sure how question and comment time usually goes in a NENA webinar, but feel free to put up your hand. Some people sometimes put a star in the chat. I've seen that. Or I guess just go for it. Oh, John, is that?
Yeah. Hi. Well, maybe just I'll try and be brief, but one of the questions we had was what the Indigenous people were aiming for with their counterclaim against the Adani proceeding, and Paul gave an overview of that. People may be interested to hear that. Another question that seemed to come up in the group was more or less trying to better understand extractivism, or what post-extractivism might look like. And I guess for me too, when I came in, a much softer type of or naive approach for thinking, well, maybe it means more recycling and less mining and not huge changes, but how you deal with what resources you've already got out of the ground rather than new ones. But the introduction, though, is so much broader than that to me. So it seems that we're having to move on a number of fronts. And what people's vision might be, you're getting hints of it, but the vision of post-extractionism, especially when we've already got such big population and big demands on resources. So I'll stop.
Thanks heaps for that, John. Yeah, no, that's great. We'll deal with them one at a time. Paul, good to see you. Did you want to share the information to everybody? Put on the spot? Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so just as an introduction, I'm in Queensland, so I've been free to go up to the Carmichael coal mine site, and I've been obviously working with Wanganjangalinggu, in particular Cody, for quite some time through some of the other actions that they've done, including the bike ride, which some of you may or may not have been able to get to. And so, yeah, I was at the site from day one, and I've been up there for pretty much the last 2 months. And so I guess I don't know what questions people have got, but I can only encourage you to get up there as soon as you're free to, or to support it however you can. Effectively, this is a solidarity action with, First Nations people who are asserting sovereignty over a portion of Australia. So, so what that actually looks like from our point of view, I suppose, is that sovereignty for First Nations people is effectively replacing or putting a third tier of government or decision making, I suppose, on certain areas of the country, where they effectively, mining companies will need to get approval from the owners of the country, the owners being not the Crown, but the First Nations people, before they can proceed with projects like the Adani Carmichael mine, recognising that our current system of government is fairly corrupt. So in terms of a radical shift in our governance and controls over land use, all of us here have probably been pushing pretty hard for years to try and get some sort of process in place or safety net that's going to stop some of these sorts of climate wrecking and effectively planet destroying projects getting off the ground, and we haven't been particularly successful in getting significant change in our governance. And this sovereignty push, which is potentially going to give a fair bit of leverage for a treaty of some sorts, is probably not a bad thing to bet on, actually getting some success in that. So that's part of the reason, and the other thing is just that it's a part of paying our rent for our involvement in the colonial machine that's given us the places that we're currently sitting in and living in, and the wealth that our country has generated off the backs of the First Nations people. So yeah, if you're feeling that kind of impulse to be involved in solidarity action, and one in particular in this case, which has a direct impact on a climate wrecking project, then Wangan-Jangalingu is definitely it. I'm also involved with Yugara people at Deebing Creek and Kabi people at Jackie Kundu, and they're the three major sovereignty actions that are happening in Queensland, and maybe the country. I'm not sure. But one of them is going to go to the High Court at some point in time and be the next Eddie Mabo, which will probably be a bit of the first domino of a massive change that happens in Australia, hopefully. So yeah, I guess what support looks like is either supporting from where you are, getting the word out there, encouraging people to go up, finding out what resources they need and sending them, or coming when you can. Can you please list? Someone just sent a message. Hang on. It's a bit hard for me to do this on the phone, so I'll see how I go with interacting with the chat at the same time. Paul, can you please list the 3 sites here as I'm in Queensland? Okay, so the 3 sites is Deebing Creek. So get on Facebook and just do a Google search for Deebing Creek. That's DEEBING, Deebing Creek. And that's a Yugara people, Auntie Karen being the main one, or jump on my Facebook page and you'll be able to link up with them as well. I just use my name, and I'm a 4-year-old pirate if you get a few choices of Paul Dukes come up as a profile picture. And for the other one is Jackie Kundu, which is Jackie Kundu, DJAKI KUN Kundu, KUNDU. But their Facebook page is Kabi Dreaming, that's KABI Dreaming. And then, of course, there's the Wangan-Jangalingu Standing Our Ground page. Yeah, that's good. Someone's put up Jackie Kundu for me.
And I think, Paul, Karen's been really awesome and has been putting all the Wangan and Jangalingu Standing Our Ground stuff.
Okay.
So,
excellent.
Yeah, people have got the chat.
Yeah, that's right. So so when you get on the chat, get on there and click on those links and get through to them and get involved, because we need people, and especially Jackie Kundu right now. Main Roads kicked them out last Friday. I turned up on site expecting just to have a chat with them, and there were like 60 cops there in a major police operation to remove 5 elderly First Nations people. One of them, 76-year-old woman, spent half a day in the watch house in Gympie. It's just absolutely appalling. And there's human rights abuses that are happening there around that. We're putting in human rights complaints and stuff, but all the support, they really need a lot of support up there. Kabi people in particular aren't as well resourced as the Wangan-Jangalingu, but yeah, not wanting to discourage you from going up to Cody as well, because he's doing an amazing job up there. They're really like the spearhead of sovereignty push in Australia. So and I think one of these is definitely going to be successful and get up in the High Court, or be the first domino. Yeah.
Thanks heaps for that, Paul. Yeah, no, it's great to learn about all these different fights that are happening around the country. And when we're talking about post-extractivism, sovereignty and Indigenous knowledges is one of the really, really huge ones. And yeah, what they're doing out on country with the Queensland police refusing to move them on, that's powerful. I just need a lot more people up there. And now I think, John, your second question was a bit more about expanding on extractivism as an idea. And I think for me, it's been amazing to unpack the term and to move away in my head from like fossil fuels are the problem to it's our whole way of looking at how we deal with the land and the water and the life that exists. And so it's to me, extractivism is a way of thinking which ends up in huge amounts of destruction. It's kind of like I can look at something which I might call a resource, a natural resource, and then I'll say, okay, I'm entitled to take that. I want to make some profit. I will use the local legal system. I'll use the local corruption. I'll persuade people and say, yep, I can take that and use it for profit. It's this kind of entitlement to be able to extract things. which is kind of the opposite to a lot of Indigenous knowledges, and also a lot of the well-being economy things that I've seen New Economy Network Australia sharing. But instead of, it's kind of going beyond mining as a problem, it's towards anything that uses resources without the consent of the people who live there, the communities who are affected, then that's not okay. So things like recycling is really useful. Like, I think we have dug up enough things for us to, you know, enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. And people talk about mining the cities, which is really exciting. There's a lot of, you know, mined minerals and resources that are being used for things that, you know, definitely could be a lot better. Like, take apart all of those warships, please. Those minerals could be doing much better things. So recycling and reusing and all of those are definitely part of it. But it's kind of unpacking the entire mindset, which, as Nat explained, a lot of our economy and Western thinking is kind of based on. So it's pretty big. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Nat.
No, I was actually just looking at what you sent through. I can't remember your name, I'm sorry, but you sent it through on the chat. Winning government by reducing inequality. So I was just looking at, so that's quite a, and I think this is the thing, is that extractivism is really big. And so I only really touched on some of the logics that are there. And I think it's about realizing it's just ingrained in so much, you know, and that it is stemmed from colonization. And then and each country is a different context, you know. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, extractivism is about the sort of extraction of minerals from the global south taken to the global north, but we're like a global north country. The largest exporter of coal, the largest exporter of lithium. You know, we're like the largest exporters of so many minerals. We don't have a sovereign wealth fund. We don't have anything for future generations, let alone the fact that what we're actually stealing is like grand theft, because we never got permission from the First Nations people here. So, and it's, yeah, it's a very short way of, it's a short frame of thinking, you know. It's not long term, it's not 7 generations of thinking at all, extractivism. It's about, let's just take now, and well, we'll work it out. We'll just find more technology and science and we'll band-aid it more, you know. And I think we, unfortunately, as much as I'm, you know, I locked onto coal infrastructure back in the early 2000s and have been against fossil fuels, I'm deeply concerned now that we're moving into this green extractivism, and most Australians have no idea, including the climate movement, that we're going to be mining so much more for the green transition. And we're already opening up huge amounts of spaces in Western Australia, and Australia is responsible for opening up huge tracts of land in Europe, in North America, in Africa, in Latin America, for what we're calling the, you know, transition minerals. So yeah, it's a big issue, and we can't do business as usual. You know, you now have, if you know, Andrew Forrest, who's the other mining magnate of Australia, he's now running around the world as the climate hero, talking about green hydrogen, you know, and he wants to do green steel and green iron. It's kind of ludicrous. But this is it's going to be the business as usual. These companies are just greenwashing like out of control right now, Rio Tinto, BHP. And we need to hold them to account. And our government's not going to do it. It's just the reality, because it's a revolving door, and it has been from day one. And I firmly, thanks Paul for talking about the sovereignty struggles in Queensland and what's happening there, because I think that's where our fight is. If we don't stand with First Nations people, we're not really going to be able to see the changes we want to make. It's not going to be easy, and at times it's going to be uncomfortable, and at times we're going to have to reconsider the way we live. But in the end, we might end up building stronger and healthier communities, not being so isolated, not dealing with mental health issues. So, you know, this is a massive, massive discussion, and we're only touching the tip of the iceberg in this webinar. And I guess Anissa and I, through the NENA Hub, really want to sort of expand on these to keep the conversation going. And I think the next one we were talking to was to go, well, if we don't have extractivism, what else do we have? And that's a huge conversation too. So I think it's just about trying to get the dialogue going, seeing where these things already exist, where the resistances are, where the alternatives are in all these different forms, because recycling is going to be part of that. but it won't be the only thing. You know, it's going to have to be many things. And it's also going to be looking at economies that have already existed for thousands of years sustainably with the planet. And how do we bring them together with maybe good things we have in our economies? So yeah, it's a very big story that we're in. I actually, despite knowing that things are probably going to get a lot worse and harder, and I just seen someone put up deep sea mining. I've been working on that for 10 years, so I'm happy to talk about deep sea mining to anybody. We're talking about opening up whole new areas on this planet, and mining our deep seas is one of the new big ones. And the narrative from the extractive industries is that this is needed for climate action. Despite the fact that this is Pacific communities' homes. They've lived and traveled on these oceans for centuries and they don't want it. We're still, we've managed to hold the industry off for 10 years, but this is another big fight that's happening, and it's Indigenous people at the front lines again, Indigenous people who are at the front lines of climate, Indigenous peoples at the front line of a lot of extractivist projects. So yeah, I think standing in solidarity is imperative for all of us if we want to actually see a new world that, is fairer and has equality. My rant for tonight.
I'm not sure, Nada, did you have a question before? I saw her hand.
Yeah, I kind of do. First off, pardon me, I just wanted to do a shout out. Thanks to Laura Bedford. We're all in the breakout room together. Can we please exchange emails? I sent you a DM. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I'll be keen to keep chatting. So Laura Bedford, check your DM in the chat. Cool. Yeah, my question would be more, what are the processes that we can do so we can sort of link the need for direct action to block extractive industries and also this wealth of academic research and reports that go into extractivism and the oncoming sort of destruction of green mining? What can we do about that?
Say that again.
Oh, can you hear me right?
Yeah, sorry. Is this specifically on green extractivism, or is it just sort of on extractivism?
I suppose it could just be general extractivism, but I just wanted to I think there are a few people here. Just in our breakout room, we started talking about direct action in terms of protesting against extractivism. And I'm just wondering what sort of discussions we could have on that in this space. It's a bit broad.
Yeah, I mean, I think direct action is really important, but you need to have a campaign. I think you need to have a whole lot of elements to support that direct action. From, being able to know exactly what the issues and what you're up against, following the money trail. For effective direct action, and I think you need mass solidarity. You need solidarity, because you just go out and start a camp and you don't have sort of the outreach of solidarity. You're going to be there alone. So, but I think there's different forms of direct action, and in some ways, maybe Nato and Lisa, you can talk to that, because that's what Blockade IMARC is hoping to bring. In January, unfortunately, the pandemic has sort of crushed that. But these forms of direct action can happen at sites on country, but they can also happen at the very meetings that these companies meet, at their shareholder meetings. They can happen in ways of interrupting and interfering in their daily rituals, if you want to call it that. There's lots of different ways we could look at it, and creative ways as well. So if you can't get out to a camp, are there sites that we can go to that are directly related to those companies that we can protest in our cities, and stop their work for a day, or close down their office, or lock onto their desks, these sort of things. I mean, we've got to remember that we now are up against more criminal charges. We need to have more spaces to actually work around the legal avenues of what we're up against, where our civil liberties, compared to when I protested in the early 2000s, have completely eroded. I locked onto Bayswater Power Station and got a $75 court fee. Now I'd probably be getting a $16,000 fine. So, we have to kind of consider, if we have these actions, what is the legal, do we need legal funds? What else are we planning that people are going to have to do time in jail for our actions? Is it a different, I think there's big conversations to be had about what types of direct action, what steps people are willing to take. But direct action definitely gets the public, you know, it gets the media, it gets public getting to know an issue instead of it just sitting like in a report or in a webinar. And it's a way sometimes for some people who prefer to engage in that way. So yeah, I mean, maybe there needs to be a separate webinar kind of to talk through that, because it is a big subject. But Anessa or Nato, maybe you could talk to the importance of this in the context of Blockade IMARC.
Sure, yeah. So Blockade IMARC is deciding to take that anti-extractivism in our cities. So yeah, unfortunately, the front lines is often far away for people. But we have, you know, one of the biggest mining conferences in the world in Melbourne every year. It's usually at the end of October, but this year they shifted it to January because of the pandemic. And so I think what we're trying to do is also link, you know, the academic stuff, because sometimes it can be quite hard for people to digest, and put it into ways that is easier for people to understand and give us something that we can do. Because I guess when I was younger, I spent a lot of time kind of asking my uni to divest, or, you know, asking the government to do this, and that became really disempowering. And so being able, like, direct action can be a thing of, you see something wrong, you do something about it, you get in the way. And so that's, I think direct action is a really powerful tool for that. And a lot of people are, you know, seeing how horrible the situation is and deciding to step up and do that. So if anybody's interested in what Blockade IMARC is all about, we'll send out some links. We'll be running trainings, and there are lots of different roles that you can take part. You don't have to lock yourself to something or stand in front of somebody. You can be a medic, you can make some food, you can dress up as a clown, you can, you know, do some knitting, or I'm hoping that we'll get a lot of drums. I think that'll be pretty fun to make a lot of noise. So yeah, there are lots of ways to be involved. I saw a question in the chat, and then I think, Linda, you might have a hand. So we'll come to you in a second. There was a question in the chat, oh, why not use the 7th generation idea that is positive rather than the negativeness of the word extract? I think this is a really good question. And for me, I think it's really important that we use both. But the worry that I have, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, Nat, but I often worry that if we're only focusing on the positives, then it's much easier for them to greenwash. It's much easier for people to feel like we're doing something, you know, and, you know, Shell and BHP and all of these companies are talking about forward-looking. We
have to shift the narrative, for sure. We have to shift the narrative. I think we have to understand extractivism, and we have to be able to talk to it really well and understand the logic of it, and the models of extractivism and the processes. But I think we need to shift the narrative that they can't greenwash what we talk about. And I know with the deep sea mining issue, one way we're doing that is not by trying to debunk the myths, that what it is we just let our Pacific partners take the lead, because these companies talk about disconnection all the time. Oh, the deep ocean, there's nothing down there. But our Pacific communities constantly talk about interconnection and connection. And that's probably the point where they can't take that away. But I think it's hard. And I've seen over and over in the years where we use language, and then the next day you see it in Rio Tinto's, you know, AGM and in posters, and it's really heartbreaking, because then you're kind of like, well, they've just taken this and they've greenwashed it. And people believe it. Oh, they've improved. You know, they're going to change. They'll never again do what they did before, and then they're going to do it again. So yeah, I think it's a big discussion around like our kind of framing and narratives and language that we use. And I think the 7th generation on those positive things is what that post-extractivism space is about. Let's just talk to what we want to create without their jargon, without their ideology, you know, and maybe it's a bit of both, I think. I think we have to have a bit of both, but it's this constant struggle for me in not being stop this, stop that, and actually like, we don't need that because we've got this, you know. So it's a hard struggle, especially as a, you know, I think for Wangan and Jack Mingu, this is their land. Of course they don't want that because it's their land, their culture and their spirit. But when we're sort of in the city, how do we then kind of navigate these spaces to talk about extractivism and what we envision in the spaces that we're living in? Because extractivism is still happening here in Naarm and Melbourne, you know, in different forms, like I said, like gentrification and, yeah, workplaces, you know, in terms of modern day slavery and things like that. So,
Linda?
Actually, I didn't have a hand. I was just like, had my hand there, but I'm patiently listening to and absorbing all of the information. So thanks everyone for sharing.
No, thanks heaps. I think there was another question in the chat. Oh, can I ask, is it being suggested I should not support green hydrogen? Do you want to take that one now?
I'm not an expert at green hydrogen, but I have friends who are looking into it. I think once again, when you have someone like Andrew Twiggy Forrest, that, you know, has destroyed Western Australia with iron ore, has bought off communities, has done some pretty damaging stuff. Who's in Ecuador? He's also in Ecuador looking for copper. He's been in Papua New Guinea through the pandemic. Oh, he can fly his private jet anywhere. You know, he has access anywhere. He's been in the Congo. So he's looking at green hydrogen, and he's most likely looking at hydro energy, which is another form of extractivism. And while he is championing this move to decarbonize, like, I mean, even to be interesting, you'll hear the CEO of Rio Tinto go, that green hydrogen is not going to happen straight away. Like, this is a bit of a, a lot of the times these men with power and money, they talk things up, is to actually get more investment and money. You know, they take risks. It's all speculation. It's like it's a game of chess for them. They don't care about the people's lives that they're putting in, you know, destroying in the way. So, yeah, it's not something that I know heaps about, but I have friends who have said, you know, it's not, it might be better, but it's not the pure answer, and we've got a long way to go. There's still going to be issues. But now with COP, he's actually greenwashed all these cabs in the UK, go green hydrogen. You know, it's a marketing machine. And I think that's what we need to be deeply concerned about, is how they go about it and who's going about it, you know. And I don't trust him whatsoever. Like, he might have his foundation and he might talk about all these things, but his actions speak louder than his words. And if you dig deep on Andrew Twiggy Forrest, you'll see that he's got a pretty dirty legacy on many levels.
Could I just say something quickly? A friend shared it on LinkedIn, and I've probably lost it by now, but an ABC article that talked a bit about Twiggy Forrest's efforts, but just a huge surface area you need of solar panels in order to generate the energy to produce the green hydrogen. That was one of the claims. I was mind-boggling when I read it, and I thought, my goodness, well, I guess that's Indigenous land as well, and how much benefits people would get if you were to do that. But again, it struck me just how complicated this whole transition and the whole area is. And yeah, but I maybe if you search the ABC News website, it might come up if it was under Twiggy Forrest and green hydrogen or something. Anyway, it is really a dilemma.
Yeah, look, I was fortunate enough to go to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in 2007 with the Wiradjuri elder, Uncle Neville Chappie Williams. And while we were there in the last day, so the last day they pulled all the interventions in and they put forward like statements. And the entire Latin American bloc of Indigenous people protested inside the UN, which is not supposed to happen. And they protested because their concerns about RED were not taken into account, and their concerns about the growth of renewable wind farms and things like that on their lands without their consent. This is 2007. So, you know, that as we say, that business as usual is the concern. And how do we decentralize some of this? Like, I think there's some amazing ideas around wind power and solar power and all these things, but do we need to have them on mass scales where we're piping the energy to Singapore? Yes, that is another idea that's going around. You know, do we need to have a massive solar panel farm in Australia somewhere and then put a pipe or something along the ocean to Singapore to feed the the energy. I mean, it's kind of madness, because the distraction of all those points, you know, we don't, yeah, nothing's really accountable.
Is this a climate emergency we're in though? Am I missing that?
No, I think you're definitely right that it's a climate emergency, but then the question is, what are we
replacing it with?
and if I think a lot of the rhetoric around green hydrogen is just saying we can keep living how we're living. And I've read Twiggy Forrest. He's like, we can grow, we can still have our lifestyles that we have today and also be green. And so I think the issue often isn't with the technology. Like solar is amazing, wind is amazing, like green hydrogen might, you know, if it is proved viable, might be important for specific, you know, ships that need to ship medicine around. Like it may well be a technology that is useful, but the rhetoric around it is about keeping the same economic system of unlimited growth. And it's not questioning,
we're not taking into account the carbon emissions that will be used to create these mines, to transport the ore, to build the renewable technology. Then what happens to the wind turbines at the end? So I'm all for this is a climate emergency. I work with communities right on the front lines whose islands have gone. But they're also fighting against deep sea mining, which is saying this is the answer to climate action. So they're like, no, we don't want our oceans mined either. You know, so it's at what cost? So we can go, I don't care that the lithium's coming from Chile, Argentina and Peru to build our EV cars, but those indigenous communities do. So where do we take responsibility for that in the West? Because we're now still putting heaps of pressure on the global South to produce the minerals and metals for this transition that we want. And as Anissa said, to live the life we're still living with all our energy consumption and everything like that. And that's the issue really. And that's the difficulty in the conversation, Timothy, is it? Because I don't want to undermine the great work of the climate movement and what people have done for many years. And we don't want to let these people take this and go, see, we told you it was all shit. So we need to work out ways to, you know, it's a big picture thing, and this extractivism runs right through the green transition, unfortunately, and that's what we need to look at. How do we kind of halt that a little bit and think about different ways we can transition and have green energy without it ruining and opening up some of the last biodiverse parts of the world, because that's what it's doing right now.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I still think I wouldn't want it to distract from the climate emergency situation. I don't see that as taking that as seriously as it is. We're heading for global crop collapse by 2100 of 99% of the species we currently rely on. We're heading for a world where these options won't be there. You know, preserving heritage won't be there for a lot of the islands. They'll be gone. So it's a hard line, drawing that line of
what's the hard line you're drawing?
Well, we need to act as fast as possible. And you mentioned that we should do it carefully, but I think the opportunity's been squandered already for the past 30 years.
On Australia, yes. No doubt about that. I mean, we're an embarrassment. I totally agree with that. Absolutely. And now the government will just be moving into a greenwashing of all this. It's horrifying, really. It's horrifying.
Just Australia, it's the world. I mean, we might be laggards, but the whole of the capitalist world is on same trajectory of 2 degrees warming and all the consequences it'll flow. I mean, we just got to be real about this.
And I think as well, thinking about when we're looking at the solutions, when we look at renewable energy, we need renewable energy and we need to lower consumption, because renewable energy on the transition of growth of like material consumption, like for example, in Europe, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Australia, we on average have 5 times the digital devices that they do in the global South. So if we are the minority world. So if we are expecting the majority world to have as many digital devices as us and we want more digital devices because we want to grow our economy, that does not, that will have so many minds, the production of all of the renewable energy needed to construct all of these things, the millions of electric cars that they're telling us are going to be the solution to the climate crisis. Those alone will produce enough emissions to get us over 2-3 degrees. So I completely agree, it's a crisis. It needs to be, yes, these technologies, and we need to consume less. A lot of us do. Obviously, there are parts of the world that we need to be getting out of poverty. So no, this is really, really important. And thanks for bringing that up, Timothy, because it's a really hard thing to communicate. And I think we, especially at Blockade IMARC, are trying to learn, how do we communicate? Because we don't want to shut renewable energies down, but we also don't want to just let them say, build.
It's about putting pressure on their supply chains. So if the climate movement doesn't now start talking about the supply chains of the green transition in the renewable sector, it's going to bite the movement on the bum in about 10 years' time, because those supply chains right now are dirty. And I know, because for rare earths, we're a rare earth mining country. We've built a massive processing plant in Malaysia with stories high of radioactive waste. Those communities never consulted to that. So, you know, and that's rare earths are needed for the transition. So it's about the supply chain. So we need to put pressure on what those supply chains look like and make sure that they're clean, green and fair all the way through. And that's probably a big part of what I think the climate movement, which I think some people in the climate movement are doing, they're not doing that, but we probably need to put more pressure on to really do that. We've worked, now we've got Google, I mean, you know, these are horrible companies, but Google, BMW, Samsung and Volvo who've declared they won't take any minerals from deep sea mining. So it's that kind of thing. I mean, deep sea mining hasn't started. It was an easy thing for them to agree to. But, you know, that's the kind of thing we need to do with the renewable sector. You won't take minerals from here, and you won't recycle, and really encourage more of that practice in that space. And it is happening. This is part of that post-extractivist talk. There is actually really good research, and there is really good things happening around those sort of alternatives. But there's not a political will. Like you said, this country is, it's shocking, right? But I think there is huge amounts of vision there and huge amounts of things that could work. But if we don't have political will, or we don't have the people going, we need to have this, we need to make this change, then it's very hard to make it happen.
And I think we could, I mean, I would happily keep having this conversation for a long time. And I am happy to stay back and keep chatting for another, like, you know, 15, 20 minutes if anybody wants to. But I also want to respect people's time. And we did say that we'd go, well, from me here down in South to 8:30, it must be 7:30 for you folks up north and other times around the country. So I'll quickly do our bit of a wrap up. But yeah, if people want to stay back, yeah, Laura, I can see your hand up. So definitely, yeah, we can turn off the recording and just keep chatting. But I just wanted to say, yeah, thanks so much for coming along to our first session of the Post-Extractivism Hub of the New Economy Network. We've obviously opened a really interesting conversation that needs many more sessions. And so our next 3 webinars that'll be happening, the second one will probably be early next year, are looking like what could life in our economy look like after extractivism. And then for the 2 after that, we want to really deep dive into green extractivism and the cost of mining for renewables and the international impacts, and also the impacts in Australia. So we'll be sending out emails about that, and we'll also be sending up a follow-up email with all the information that we were talked about today. I've seen so many links go through the chat that I want to read later. So that's really good. And also, yeah, we wanted to say this is co-hosted with Blockade IMARC, which is one way for people to get involved in anti-extractivism. And I just wanted to share a very quick 30-second video that has not been publicly shared yet, but this is us at Blockade IMARC trying to work out how to communicate this extractivism message to people. And so also really interested in your feedback. So we'll share this. And then there we go. So we'll share that round with you, and hopefully that can help start some conversations. But yeah, thanks so much for coming. Hopefully see you again for more conversations soon.